Hi, welcome to the Dieku podcast. I'm Gary Snow. Today I welcome Tomas Härenstam, the CEO of Free League Publishing and the creator of the Year Zero engine, which has been used in many of their amazing games such as Tales from the Loop, Vaesen, Alien, Blade Runner, and Coriolis, which recently launched a new version called The Great Dark. Tomas, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I have been a huge fan of Free League since the first time I got my hands on a book, and I know this is one of your first releases that you did in English, at least, and that's been a wild ride. I know you just won a couple ENNIES again.
Yeah.
And are your cupboards full of them now? You're just kind of like using them as doorstops.
No, we have a few actually, which is fantastic. And yeah, we've planned here at the office to have some nice place to put them, but we haven't quite gotten to that yet. So it's but they're greatly appreciated, and we're really happy about them.
Well, you have deserved all of them. I think everything has been amazing. And one of the goals of my interview today is I really wanted to talk about the evolution of Free League. We want to talk about some of your great games. There's so many too that we could do a deep dive on almost every single one of them. But I also wanted to reference this book called Outside the Box. And it talks about the takeover of the world from the Swedish role-playing perspective.
I think that's a bit strong, but yeah.
Yeah. So this was gifted to me from my friend Tom Kronhofer, who I've worked with on my own little game, Fang. And I just wanted to say, like, as I was reading this and looking at the evolution of the game, and so everybody go out there and check out this book. It's really insightful. Going back now into your history, before we get going into the Free League history, how did you get started in role-playing games? Like, what was your kind of like first encounter that you went, this is kind of cool?
Yeah, I mean, I started in the mid 80s, like a lot of other kids, mostly, boys back then. That was the case, but that was like a big wave in the mid 80s. I think we were a couple of years after, America, and there was some people playing D&D like in the late 70s and early 80s, but it didn't really catch on until a Swedish company started early 80s, and they published their first game in 1982, which was Dragonsbane, which is actually not Dungeons and Dragons, but actually a translation of a early Chaosium game that I think was called Fantasy World or something. It was just a very small booklet, really, and that was translated and published in Swedish under the name Dragonsbane. That was like the start of the big RPG wave in Sweden, and that sort of a couple of years after that really took off. So my first contact was with their second game called Mutant, and that was released in 1984, and I got it for my 11th birthday in 1985, and I had no idea what an RPG was, and neither did my dad, who bought this game for me, so I was clueless. But I had a 3-year older brother, and he and I together sort of figured it out and started playing, and we brought in like friends and cousins and things, and it sort of just ballooned from there. And that game, Mutant, is actually the one that we did. Our Free League did a version of, like, what is it, 20 plus 30 years later, that you just showed there, Mutant Year Zero on that you had there is our version of Mutant, which was my first game.
And it seems like you've kind of built up like a band of cohorts that are all in the same mindset. Did you have any breaks but like, obviously you did probably have some breaks as you're like getting your education and your career and that kind of stuff. Did you ever move away from role-playing games and then come back to it?
Yeah, I guess you could say that, at least in terms of actually playing them. I had a fairly long break from like mid 90s until the mid O's, like for almost like a decade. I didn't really play much due to traveling, education, getting jobs, careers, things, kids, everything. But I never quite lost touch. I still sort of kept a little bit up to speed on what was going on in the RPG space. I was still interested. I still bought a game now and then, mostly to read, but But then, so I had almost a 10-year break from playing actively. But then actually, what got me back into it was that I was a bit more settled down. I had a bit more free time. And then actually another version of Mutant, which was like my go-to original game, came out by another publisher in like 2003, I think. And that really got my attention. And around a couple of years, took a bit of time, but I was like, oh, I really have to play this game. So then I started pulling together like my brothers again and others, and we started playing this new edition of Mutant. And actually, in the forum, the sort of online forum that this publisher called Jan Ringen, the Iron Circle, who actually created Symbaroum, and they are now part of Free League, by the way. So their online forum was a great place where a lot of people got together, players, GMs, and everyone, just sharing things. And I was there, and that's where the four founders of Free League was we found each other and started, creating things. We were part of this community around Jan Ringen and their forums, and their other game Coriolis, which they released a little bit later. So Mutant Coriolis was their two games back then, and we sort of started doing things like freelance stuff, but not for money, just for fun, for just community content, things, fan stuff for those games. And that's sort of where Free League got started. And that's also why the name is Free League, because Free League is a faction in Coriolis. So the name was actually taken from that game.
And how long did you produce games like just in Swedish, and then finally decide, okay, like we're gonna like jump into the English publishing business too?
Yeah, I mean, for the first couple of years, we just did like fan stuff for Mutant and Coriolis. But then Jan Ringen announced that they were shut down. They would sort of shut down operations. And by then they had actually asked me to work on another game of theirs, which was based on a series of fantasy novels in Swedish, novels which were in turn based on an earlier 1980s campaign for the Drakar och Demoner, the fantasy game that I talked about earlier. The writer of those adventures had turned them into novels, and Jan Ringen was releasing these novels, and they wanted to make an RPG based on those novels. And I had done some rules work. I did an alternate rules set for Mutant because I thought it wasn't good enough or something. So I did my own, and then I guess they thought that was fairly interesting. So then when they needed someone to sort of write rules for this new game, I was asked to do that, so I did. But in the middle of that project, they decided to actually shut down and stop releasing anything. And then they asked us, because then we were a small team of freelancers who did this, and they asked us, do you want to take over this project, this new game, which was called Svavelvinter, which is the name of the first campaign module and the first novel of that series. And then we realized, okay, if we want to do this, we have to start a company. And that's when sort of Free League as a company got going. And our first game was released in Swedish only, called Svavelvinter in 2012. So that was like our first game that we sold and published properly. Before then, it was just online stuff, small things, maybe a little bit of print on demand, but very small things. So yeah, and then the next year, 2013, we released another game based on another series of fantasy novels called Morwale. So those games were only in Swedish, but then around that time, we started talking to the license owner of Mutant, because still Mutant was sort of very close to my heart. And since Jan Ringen had shut down, they were not doing their edition anymore. We figured, could we make our own edition of Mutant? So we talked to them and sent them Svavelvinter, and they seemed to think it was decent. So we got the license to do another edition of Mutant. So we did that also first only in Swedish. But shortly after that was released in Swedish, we had started talking about, wouldn't it be fun just to see if this would work to translate it and see if we can get it published in overseas and in English, and see that could be fun. But we needed someone to help us do that. So then that summer I reached out to, I talked to a few different ones, but I think fairly early I got in touch with Modifius and Chris Birch at Modifius. And they were already doing at the time a game based on Mutant Chronicles, which is actually another offshoot of Mutant, but it's its own thing now. They were doing the Mutant Chronicles RPG, so it just made sense to sort of work together. And they helped us to distribute Mutant Year Zero, which I translated, and we fairly quickly did an English version. And that was released late 2014. So that was the first thing we did in English. And that's the game that you had there early on.
And so looking back at the points when you were publishing in Swedish and like, you know, building up your reputation and your skill sets and that kind of thing, was there ever points that you were like, you know what, like this is a lot of work? Like, were you working a full-time job and this was a side piece that you were doing, or like in the whole team working together and the dynamics of that? Were there like challenges or like points that you were like, I don't know if I want to keep going on this path?
I mean, yeah, we were 4 people in the beginning, and we were doing everything. I mean, we had some freelancers. Well, they were not really freelancers either, because they didn't get paid, and neither did we. We're very happy if we could get and raise enough money to print the books and get them out. That was the goal, and you know, we never. So that was in the early days. That this was just a side thing that we did for fun on nights and weekends and things like that. And we all had full-time, you know, real jobs. And I don't know. I don't remember any period where we were close to shutting down or stopping doing this. I think we had a lot of fun, and it grew fairly quickly. So after Mutant Year Zero was released in 2014, it started taking off. We also did. Around that time, like then I think 2015, something like that, we did our first Kickstarter, and that sort of took off, and it fairly quickly grew from there to become, in like 2 or 3 years, it went from purely a hobby to part-time something, and we started one after another to do like Free League as a part-time job, trying to juggle that with, you know, another job as well. And then in 17, 18, I think by then we were 3 people who were moved over to do it well, pretty much full-time, in some various degrees of what full-time means, but anyway, pretty much as our main work. By 2018 we were like 3, and then 4, and then it sort of, so no, I don't remember any period where we were sort of ever considering shutting down or giving up or anything like that. It was I think we just had a lot of fun, so it just sort of it just kind of grew from there.
And going back to when you were doing the, you know, unique rule set, which turned out to be the Year Zero engine, at that point, did you ever kind of envision that it would like be used so much and so predominantly in your games, or was it just like, oh, this is a unique mechanic I've kind of like not stumbled across, because it probably, you know, took a lot of testing and inspiration?
Yeah, I mean, no, absolutely. I mean, we had no idea that it would be like a rule set or an engine or anything like that to use in any other game. It was basically just the rules that I was tinkering with for Mutant Year Zero. That there was never any thought of that being used for anything else. And that was when I was writing the Swedish version, you know, when the rules were designed. And that took a long time, because I was doing that sort of on the side while doing the other games that I mentioned. So this was over a period of several years, and before Free League was a business, any proper business anyway. And it was very, you know, influenced by the games of that era, especially on sort of the indie movement and the Forge movement. So there's a lot of game. I mean, like in the DNA from games like Mouse Guard and Fate and Apocalypse World and those games that I was really into back then. Still think they're brilliant. You know, that was the big inspiration, and other games in that whole wave of games. Although I felt then, and still do, that some of those amazing, you know, indie games were sometimes a bit hard to sort of get into. So we wanted to sort of get some of those brilliant ideas, but sort of put our own mind to it and mix it with our own ideas and create something that perhaps was a bit more easy to get into. So it's sort of, this is, I mean, now it's like a neo-trad style of game or something, I guess is the term for it. We didn't have a term for it back then, but I think that was sort of the idea, to sort of bridge the gap between traditional RPGs and the way they had looked before, and these great new ideas out of the indie movement, and bring our own ideas into that. And that's sort of where this whole thing started. But there was never a grand plan. These were just sort of the ideas that we were tinkering with, and rules that we enjoyed, and so we just built it for Mutant Year Zero, and then only later it sort of tried it for another game, first the Coriolis, which is we wanted to do a new edition of. And then we never, in the beginning of that project, we were not intending to use the Mutant Year Zero games, because the rules, that was never the idea. So we actually tried a bunch of different systems, and then in the end, someone just said, this isn't really working. Why don't we just try the Mutant Year Zero rules and see if we can get those to work for Coriolis as well? That would be, that would save some time. So we did, and that worked pretty well. So we thought, we went with that. And soon after, we started working on the game, the Tales from the Loop game, based on an art book by Simon Stålenhag that we had published. And we had a great freelancer called Nils Hintze who wrote the game. And we said, since we have 2 games now using sort of the same rules, it would be pretty cool if you used that core sort of engine for Tales from the Loop as well. So he did, but he put his own spin on it. And by then we had 3 games with the same sort of core. And then I think by the next game after that, which was Forbidden Lands, it felt that natural to continue. And I think around that time is when we started calling it the Year Zero engine. It was never called that before. It was never and so it sort of grew into that. It was never a grand plan to begin with.
You mentioned Tales from the Loop, which it's a fantastic game, and all 3 versions of that game now, Into the Flood and Electric State. The art by you mentioned Simon Stålenhag, and like how incredible that is. And I have to say, just like all of your games are beautiful. And so like I'm kind of like I guess maybe an art snob as far as the game stuff goes, that I really love it when I can see like the passion in the art and the production values in the game. And as far as like that went, it seemed like a really nice fit. Like, how was that first kind of conversation with Simon where you went, hey, like we could do something with this?
Yeah, right. Yeah, that was pretty fantastic. I mean, we did have always sort of high ambitions on the art and graphic design side from the start. I think that came from a tradition of I mean, Jan Ringen, who did one version of Mutant before us, and the original Coriolis game, they had a standard. They had another company called Riot Minds who did a version of Drakar Demoner in between. They both had great art. So that was sort of going into starting Free League. We also sort of, that was sort of part of where we felt we needed to be, and one of the founders of Free League, Christian, is and was a graphic designer. That was his day job back then as well, so that helped a lot. So we early on felt we really need to work with top illustrators and have really good graphic design, and that was always part of our games from the start. And the way we came in contact with Simon, I mean, his stuff, he just put his art online. That was before he published any book. This was 2012, 2013, I guess. And just someone else, someone we knew in the community, just felt that, this art should be a book. And I think, and Free League should, publish it. So he put us in touch with Simon just for a meeting. Simon is not really an RPG player, but he was still fairly heavily influenced by that whole world, because I think his older brother was into RPGs, and he was too young to really be part of it. He was the small kid watching the big kids play RPGs, and that sort of influenced his life and his art, I guess. So he was very much into that whole scene without really having been in it himself. So we had a great time, and ended up publishing his first book, Tales from the Loop, first in Swedish, and then the year after we did a Kickstarter to do it also in English, and that went well, and that sort of took off from there, and now Simon is a partner, one of the co-owners of Free League, and we are continuing to publish his art books ever since, and we have done, like you said, a series of RPGs based on, and even a board game based on his books as well. So yeah, and that was Tales from the Loop. The RPG also did, even though we had released Mutant Year Zero and Coriolis in between. I think Tales from the Loop was the one that I think really caught the attention of a lot of people across the world, really. And that sort of caught us by surprise, and that was one big step. There's been a couple of big steps, I guess, for free. Mutant Year Zero was definitely one big step. I think Tales from the Loop was another big step.
Well, it seemed to hit, around the same time as Stranger Things, which like the young kids on bikes going out and exploring the supernatural. So it does the timing of it was great.
The timing was just good, not planned at all, but very, very fortunate. Yeah.
And then I also have to kind of ask, like, when you were like getting into this world of like art first and then pulling from the art, like that seems like a really successful model that you're seeing out there, that there's this art and it found a home in a role-playing game. And then the next step I could ask as Vaesen, and I mean, this is so beautiful, and the art from Johan Egerkrans is like fantastic, and a similar process, I believe.
Yeah, pretty similar. I mean, we were aware of that book also early on. We had meetings with Johan,
Johan, sorry. I think I said Johan.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, so we had meetings with him like early on and discussed doing. This was before we did anything with Simon. Even we had the first talks with Johan, but then that didn't really amount to. It took a couple of years before we found a way to do this. And Johan is also from that role-playing generation, so he was very much a role player as a kid. Now he's more into figure. He's a big Warhammer, figure painter as well. So he does more of that than role playing these days, I guess. But he's still very much part of that world. So it was. And since we had by then done Tales from the Loop, it just felt like, Vaesen would be a perfect property or base for an RPG. It's like a horror game, but with a twist, going heavy into like folklore. And we just felt that using that idea, and of course Johan's art, and he did also a bunch of new art for the game as well. So it's not only from the art book, but there's quite a bit from the art book as well. So that was a model. Those two, of course, games. That model proved, of course, there also needs to be a decent game there, not just pretty art. But the art certainly doesn't hurt. So that combination proved to be pretty powerful and successful for us. So those two games have really done that. And then we have also done other games like Alien, where we produced, because we have Martin Greep, who's one of the co-owners, who came from Janringen, who illustrated the original their version of Mutant and Coriolis. He's now also partner of Free League, and he illustrated pretty much all of the Alien RPG and the Blade Runner RPG. So I think we have been lucky to work with really talented illustrators, like Johan and Simon and Martin and a bunch of others as well.
Well, certainly you can tell like it's a very much art focus, and and also the underpinnings of your like strong writing and world building. And you mentioned the Alien game, and now like you've since released Alien Evolved, and I can't help but know that Alien Earth is like hitting Netflix right now. And going into that whole like licensing era that you've got Alien, Blade Runner, Walking Dead, and like licensed games. How has it been? Is it been like the art where you went, okay, like there's this world and we just need to kind of like fine tune it for a role playing game?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it felt fairly natural to move into licensed games since we really came from there. I mean, like I mentioned, our very first game, Svavelvinter, was based on a series of fantasy novels. So it was not our own world. It was someone else's world that we were playing around in. And Mutant obviously was an actual license, even though it was not a big Hollywood brand, but it was still technically very much a licensed game. So, and then we worked with Simon, who we worked in, created games out of his art and his worlds, and then with Johan. So it felt like a pretty natural step to work with these even larger licenses. Like initially it was Alien and Blade Runner that we contacted pretty much at the same time, and that came about through a guy called Joe Lefavi who lives in Hollywood, in California, and he works with licensing, and he was a fan. It turned out he's a big RPG fan, and he enjoyed Tales from the Loop, the game, and we got in touch through some mutual acquaintances, and he offered to sort of navigate that field, because that is kind of tricky to get, to talk to the right people and get that, especially from overseas when you're not really familiar with, the process of these things. So through Joe, he negotiated both Alien and Blade Runner. One of them took a bit longer, but anyway, so basically that came about through, and it felt like a natural evolution after having done Tales from the Loop and some other things to do this. And working with another world, like someone else's world, I always found that kind of fun, actually. I mean, personally, there's a lot to be said for pure world building. That's great too. But personally, I think it can be, turning a very cool world that I enjoy imagining myself in, turn that into an RPG, I think is sort of, for me, is the biggest, what I enjoyed the most. So it just felt like a fairly natural step. So we built on that, but we also continued to work on original games as well, like Coriolis and then Symbaroum, which came through Team Janringen. So we wanted to sort of balance the licensed stuff with our own original games as well. And that continues to be what we tried to do.
And it reminds me a lot of the Star Wars West End D6 system, like at that point where they were basically the torchbearers for Star Wars for many years. And they were developing the world, building it and growing the lore and that kind of thing. And I'm curious, how does it work as far as so there's obviously Alien Earth, and there's probably the holders of Alien have like a Bible, and how much does your work influence theirs and vice versa? Are you able to now do Alien Earth stuff? Is that a future release that you're able to do?
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, generally, how it works is that we work fairly freely. I mean, we do what we want to do, but of course, we try to base it on everything. We have a bunch of assets and things from the license holder, but then there's also just like for big franchises like Alien and Blade Runner and things like that, there's just also so much out there. So you just have to sort of dive in and then we sort of present what we want to do to the license holder, and they they go through everything, and they approve, or they have comments or feedback or whatever. Usually it's been a fairly smooth process, but that's sort of the way it works. And then once they approve it, we can do it. And I can't say that I know that what I do know is that we have had some things, like smaller things, like I think we had some character in an Alien book that then appeared in a video game, an Alien video game later, and things like that. So it's mostly on that sort of level. I think the Star Wars example you used is a great one. That was really, as far as I understand it, also that was like a lot of what was done for the RPG has then been sort of become Star Wars canon. And I can't say we have done the same, but it is the case that RPGs are also lore Bibles. I think we have played our part in creating or compiling a sort of a collected idea of the world, both for Blade Runner and Alien, and to sort of slightly expand those universes, but also to sort of compile everything that's been out there and creating sort of what can be seen as lore Bibles for those worlds. I think those games have some use, and it can be fun for even people who don't play role-playing games, because they are very well researched and approved by the license holders. They are, like, in a sense, official lore Bibles also.
Do you get a bump when like Alien Earth drops? All of a sudden you go, whoa, there's a big spike in sales?
I didn't check, to be honest. I don't know. But generally, I'm not sure. I mean, it can happen if there's like some big release, and we sometimes try to sort of work with that a little bit to do some cross promotion and things. But we don't have like insight into like the production of a film. We can get some things ahead of time, but generally we need to sort of work with what we have. So for Alien Earth, I think there's definitely opportunities to do things in the future. So we haven't decided that yet, but we're following the show with much interest and mining it for ideas. So that might definitely happen down the line. So we'll see. But even in the Evolved game now, we have things from the film that came out, the Romulus film that came out last year. So that's in the Evolved edition, and we did a lot of research there. That was a lot of fun. We have a illustrator, John R. Mulaney, who does these sort of schematic thing, beautiful schematics of very detailed of like spaceships and vehicles and gun and weapons and things. And he did a lot of research into the ship and the gear that's in Alien Romulus also, and contacted the people who had actually made the models used for shooting the film, and to see to get even more details on exactly how it should look in the schematic. So definitely we tied into that film and what was available there. Also expanding this place called Jackson Star, where the film starts. This is like a mining colony. So that is explored in detail in the new Alien Evolved core book as well. So we definitely tie it in with other things that is going on in these franchises.
Quick question. Is Predator ever going to see its appearance in one of your books? Is that allowed?
Maybe. We'll see. Technically, it's a different license, but then again, we never know. It could happen. So no promises, but yeah, you never know.
I want to be respectful of your time, but I just have to ask before we head out here. Drakar Ok Demoner, and it seems like it's a bit of a full circle when you guys acquired that. How did that feel for you?
Yeah, I mean that was great. I mean, for us, like I mentioned, Drakar Demoner was the original Swedish RPG. Not my second RPG personally, but it was the first one that came out in Swedish. So that was the big game, and we were already talking to the company who published the edition of Drakar Demoner back in the early 2000s, and when we freely started and the early 2010s. And they were not that at that point. They were still sort of doing their version. That, by the way, was called Drakar Demoner Trudvang, which is a sort of Viking-inspired version of Drakar Demoner, which they then actually decoupled from the brand and became their own game, Trudvang Chronicles, which was out. It's not active anymore, but it was for a while. So we talked to them about doing a new edition, but that we didn't agree back then. And then a few years later, we actually discussed acquiring the whole brand from them, because they had in turn acquired it from the original publisher of Drakar Demoner in the 80s, because they went out of business in the 90s. And then this Right Minds took over the brand name, and they held it for about 20 years. But I think eventually we had discussions off and on over the years, but then just out of the blue, really, it's 4 years ago now, they asked if we wanted to acquire the brand, and we could agree on the details of that. And even though we didn't plan it at the time, and we had several other fantasy RPGs in publication, we had Symbaroum, we had Forbidden Lands. So there was already, we felt, do we really want another fantasy RPG titles? Is that something we had even done by then? I think maybe the One Ring was also out by then, or at least on its way. So but then, and we felt, okay, we'll do it. It's a once in a lifetime chance, but we'll just do it in Swedish, because nobody knows about this game outside of Sweden, so it wouldn't make any sense. But then we started working on it, and we felt this is actually going to be pretty cool. And of course, there was some talk about it and some interest, so we figured we'll try and see if we can do it. So we did a Kickstarter, and we figured we'd do it for an English version as well, and just see how that goes. and that turned into Dragonbane, and that's been doing really well too. So now that is actually one of sort of our bigger original titles, and we're doing it as Drakar in Swedish and Dragonbane in English, and that's been a lot of fun.
I read in the book, just and quickly, that Chaosium reached out and said, "Hey, you're using our system." And that was,
yeah, I mean, I don't. Yeah, they did reach out early on. I mean, there's a long history there that it's probably too long to unwind. But basically, what is the case that, as I mentioned, the very first edition of Drakar, which came out in '82, was a translation of a Chaosium game, and that was a license. So they, the Swedish publisher called Äventyrsspel, or Target Games, they were called also. They had a license agreement with Chaosium for, and that went on until late 80s. So I think 87, 88, 89, I don't remember. But yeah, in the late 80s, until between those, for that period, this was Drakar was a licensed game, and Äventyrsspel paid a royalty to Chaosium for it. But then at the late 80s, they had a decision where they split because Drakar had gone its own way, become its own thing. Chaosium was doing other things, and and then there was an agreement between the companies that, okay, all ties are severed. There was a sum of money paid, and then there were no more royalties, and they parted ways. And Drakar became its own thing, even though, of course, it still had that heritage also in its DNA, and also in the rules. There are similarities, but RPG rules there are similarities between lots of systems, and it's every new system somehow builds on an older system.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so that's but this definitely has like RuneQuest in its DNA. It's a roll under system. It's a sort of a, it doesn't have levels, and so it does have some things remaining from that shared DNA with RuneQuest and the early Chaosium games, and that remains a little bit to this day, even though now Dragonbane is a D20 system, not percentile, and there are lots of differences, but there are also some similarities. So yeah, they did reach out to us about that, just mostly I think out of curiosity, and they wanted to know what we were planning to do. But then in the end, there was no, we are good friends with Chaosium. There were no hard feelings, and we could also dig up that old contract just to make it very clear that there are no claims any longer from Chaosium's side on Drakar, and there haven't been any such claims since like 1987. So it's ancient history by now.
One last question for you. So when you look back upon your journey with Free League and your role-playing game career, can you believe that you're in this position now? Like, it must feel a little bit surreal I would say that you're like producing the best stuff out there in the role-playing game world. You've got like people that are working in the community, a Stockholm cartel, awesome books unto themselves, and you're helping them get it out there. Reflecting upon it all, like, how does it feel?
Yeah, no, it does feel surreal sometimes, and I could never imagine that this would be what I would be doing, when I started playing RPGs, and when I was like 11, 12, and that this could actually be what I would be doing in my 50s. So that was I would never have dreamed it in a million years. But yeah, it is it's been an interesting ride, and I'm very happy and fortunate that this is the way things have turned out, because I couldn't have dreamt anything like this would actually ever happen.
Well, we haven't even touched on Runner and Coriolis, and like, there's just so much that you've been doing. It's been an amazing journey to see, and a success story. And maybe you can come back and we can delve deeper into some of these other things in the future. But I just want to say, Tomas, thank you for coming on the show and just sharing a little bit about yourself and your past and all the good stuff that Free League is doing.
Thanks. Great to be here.